students, welcome back to the Road to Success MCAT test prep series. This video will be talking about behavior and how it affects our brain. This video is the fourth video I have about psychology for the MCAT test prep, so we're almost halfway there. I'll be starting off this video by talking about the brain's anatomy and physiology. The brain has many different structures and functions that need to be known for us to understand how it affects our body. I will follow up by talking about brain studies. These are various different studies that radiologists and scientists use to study our brain. I'll finish this off by talking about genetics and behavioral theories. We have a lot of important stuff to talk about today, so let's jump right into it. I'll be starting off with the brain's anatomy.
All right, let's start off with the discussion of the biology behind behavior, starting with the cerebrum. The cerebral cortex is split into 4 different lobes. The frontal lobe controls higher thinking, such as cognition, speech production, and voluntary voice commands. The parietal lobe controls somatosensation and positioning. The occipital lobe controls vision, and the temporal lobe controls sound perception, as well as speech comprehension. There are several structures in the subcortical cerebrum, starting with the internal capsule. This contains several important pathways that I'll be discussing in a future video. We already discussed the corpus callosum in a previous video. This connects the 2 hemispheres together. The basal ganglia controls motor function. The thalamus is a sensory relay station. And the hypothalamus is the master of the master gland, the pituitary gland. Now, with these, I want to point out that the hypothalamus and the thalamus are going to be very, very high yield stuff. Be very familiar with the concept and their functions. So moving forward, the cerebellum is all about movement and positioning. The side cerebellum controls your limbs, while the middle cerebellum controls general positioning and walking behavior. The brainstem consists of the midbrain, pons, and medulla. These connect the brain and are the source of cranial nerves. These cranial nerves innervate various parts of our body, such as your tongue, your upper neck, your face, stuff like that. The reticular formation plays a role in autonomic function. So stuff like breathing, digestion, like basically the rest and digest function is what the reticular formation is part of. Now, moving on to brain studies, let's first talk about lesion studies. Tissue removal is a standard practice used to study what part of the brain is doing what. Radiofrequency lesions are pretty interesting, as they're used to remove or destroy tissues inside of the brain. Neurochemical lesions are exophytic lesions that cause an influx of calcium to enter the brain, killing neurons. Lastly, cortical cooling and cryoloop processes are processes where freezing the brain is are processes where we freeze the brain to stop neurons from firing. Now, I do want to take a point and point out, obviously, that this will be a bit low yield, but I do want you guys to know that cryoloops are temporary, as you can usually just take them out of the brain whenever you're done, whereas cortical cooling tends to be a bit more permanent. Now, moving forward, let's talk about our brain scans. There are several brain scans that we use to visualize the brain. CAT scans and MRI scans are used to study brain structure, while EEGs and MEGs are used to study brain function. Note that these structure scans, they tend to be very invasive, while EEGs and MEGs, not so much. So I'll say these are non-invasive. But I do want to point out that the MEG is much more expensive. That being said, since it's a much more expensive scan, it also has a lot more resolution. So the MEG is much better as opposed to the EEG, but since it's so much more expensive, you'll be much more familiar with the EEG going into the MCAT and further into med school. So these 2 scans, the fMRI and the PET, they can analyze both structure and function of the brain. I do want to point out that the PET will be tested, and uh, a key hint word for the PET would be something talking about how they use a radioactive glucose molecule. They use a radioactive glucose molecule to find or to measure flow occurring in the brain to see where the glucose will be uptaken. So moving on, let's talk about the genetics behind our behavior. Twin studies are studies performed on twins raised in different environments to test the effects of the concept of nature versus nurture. These studies are usually done with monozygotic twins, or identical twins, as opposed to the dizygotic or fraternal twins. Now, this is obviously done because monozygotic twins have the identical genetic code, so it's easier to see if a change of behavior is due to their genetic disposition or the environment that they're raised in. Adoption studies share a similar purpose as well. These study the effects of the environment on a child's behavior to see if their behavior is due to their surroundings or if it is innate. This is the basis of nature versus nurture, and the results over the years have not been very conclusive. It seems that it's been a mix of both our innate behavior and environmental causes that influence our disposition. Our innate traits are genetically programmed into our brain. They will be present even if we are isolated. They cannot be modified, and they are fully developed from day one. Learned traits, on the other hand, are the complete opposite. Our surroundings affect these traits, and they can be changed or improved over time. Now, let's move on to motivation. There are several theories on why we get motivated by various different things. The evolutionary theory states that we have basic instincts that we follow: eat, sleep, hunt, etc. This goes hand in hand with the drive reduction theory, which states that when we have an urge or a drive, we seek to reduce it. For example, if we become hungry, we seek food to reduce that feeling. This applies to other drives too, such as thirst, sex, and even boredom. The optimal arousal theory states that we want to be fully aroused and we want to keep that feeling up as much as we can. This theory does a very good job of explaining thrill-seeking activities, such as going to the amusement park or taking part in extreme sports, and unfortunately it also explains why we partake in drugs. The cognitive theory states that cognition, or thought, drives behavior. But the most important theory that I want to discuss here is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Abraham Maslow stated that humans need to have their basic needs fulfilled first, before seeking out their higher desires. Our basic needs are, well, basic. Physiological needs like food and water, safety as in shelter. Only after achieving these can we achieve our higher desires for love or self-esteem, or pursuing a higher purpose, aesthetics, stuff like that. Please memorize this graphic right here, this pyramid right here. Please memorize it, as it's very important to know for the exam. The incentive theory states that humans want to maximize rewards while minimizing punishments. I'll talk more about these concepts in another video though, as it can be its own thing entirely. And lastly, biosociocultural factors. Our surroundings play a huge role in our desires. From wanting to fit in as a child to wanting to stand out at work as an adult, there are various different ways that our world plays a role in what we desire. Can you think of any examples? As a child, we all fell victim to peer pressure, so you must have like a personal one to yourself as to explain like why you did something as a child. So that could be a good example of a biosociocultural factor. If you're comfortable, please feel free to drop that below. But moving on, let's go to our last subject here, attitude theories. These theories state that our attitude is driven by our behavior. Let's start off with the concept of the foot in the door phenomenon. This phenomenon states that we will agree to smaller favors before eventually agreeing to larger ones over time. The small favor will get one's foot in the door, and the larger one will get you in completely. Role-playing also changes your behavior and eventually your attitude. You all must be familiar with the Zimbardo prison experiment. The prisoners in that experiment grew fearful and submissive of the people who were role-playing as prison guards as they grew violent and they abused their power. This is so extreme, in fact, that they had to cancel this experiment several weeks in advance. Now, lastly, let's talk about cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is when we have two or more conflicting beliefs that can alter how we behave. We do 4 things to reduce this discomfort. For example, let's say that a smoker discovers that smoking causes cancer. By modifying his cognitions, he will tell himself that he'll be okay because he doesn't smoke that much, even though he does. He can trivialize this knowledge by saying that the study is not properly sourced. He can add on to his cognitions by stating that he does activities to reduce the risk of cancer, such as exercising. And lastly, he can just straight up outright deny the facts. So with that being said, that's all I have for you guys today. This was a short video, but it did cover some important topics. Specifically, I want you guys to cover the pyramid right here, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Very, very important stuff. I also would like you guys to focus on the attitude and theories and stuff like that. Cognitive dissonance is a kind of hard subject for students to tackle on, but I hope you guys will be able to understand it. If not, feel free to hit me up. I'll be more than happy to help you guys. Other than that, we cover brain structures, brain functions, brain scans, a lot of brain stuff today. So I hope that all of that is going to be able to help you guys understand how we behave and how it affects our behavior. That's all I have for you guys today. Have a good rest of your day and happy studying.